Today's show, we are talking drones and security. Welcome to the Titan Protection Show. I am Ryan Smith. Welcome to the Titan Protection Show. I am Ryan Smith, and today we are honored to have Jason Souci on our show today. Jason, thanks for stopping in and saying hi.
Glad to be on the show, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I want to give a little background on you, but I'd also like for you to expand a little bit more on it. When we talked and have talked in the past, your background and your story was really interesting, so I want to do that justice. But you are the host of Do You Know Drones podcast, a drone scientist, and also the co-founder of Neurodiversity Works. I want to get into several of those things, and mainly today I think we'll be talking about beyond visual line of sight and drones and security. But if you don't mind just giving us kind of your high-level view or background, your story with drones and how you got into the industry was very interesting. Love to hear a little bit more about it.
Sure thing. And thanks, Ryan. Yeah, it's I have an ironic story. So I see drones as a tool for lots of different things. I always have. So my background is I'm a remote sensing scientist or a geospatial scientist. So I use drone data to craft insights for a wide variety of different industries. Now, that started 22 years ago. Drones I've been doing the last 12 years, and it's an ironic story in how I got into drones. So my career sort of been a mix of defense and intelligence and commercial imagery exploitation. And commercial stuff is that's what we're mainly going to be talking about today, and it's what I've been focusing on the last 12 years. But before that, I am an Air Force Academy graduate. I did get a master's in astronautical engineering, which is rocket science, I guess. But I found that very compartmentalized and not really in line with what I kind of wanted to do. I kind of fell in love with remote sensing, so I've been really blessed to be able to do that as a career. But when I had the opportunity to deploy to Afghanistan to support an intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance mission that was very successful, that ran for more than a decade and had a dozen aircraft that we procured, outfitted, tested, integrated, deployed, operated, and then decommissioned over about a 10-year period. I got to do that for about 4 years, 3 years active in Afghanistan. And it was really kind of a fun job. Got to support the warfighter and the coalition forces and doing some really cool stuff. Basically finding bad guys doing bad things. I'll leave it at that. So we were flying along one day, and I'm sure your listeners, if you're not familiar with aviation terminology, I'll use one. Every crewed aircraft has a TCAS, or a traffic collision alert system. It's basically a radar system that says, "Hey, dummy, you're going to hit something," and it gives you a corrective action. Our pilots tested on pre-flight, and we never hear from it again.
Hopefully,
yeah. We were many hours into a mission, and flying straight and level, TCAS went off. Okay, that's not cool. We had some younger pilots, so we thought maybe they were messing with us. They were not. They were a little freaked out, going through their checklist and like, okay, everyone look out. I was the mission commander on that particular mission. I looked over my left shoulder over the right wing and said, yeah, tally ho, I got a Reaper UAV ascending through our airspace about 30 meters off our right wing. So, yeah, that was fun.
That'll wake you up.
Yeah, that'll wake you up in the morning. Change of a flight suit later, and little mission intel debrief. And yeah, the thing that I found out was that like those. This could segue very interesting into our conversation, but like when those aircraft lose their SATCOM, and by the way, they're really big. They're about as big as our aircraft, maybe a little bigger. And they got missiles. They do two things. They orbit and they elevate. Well, we were operating, they were underneath us many, many thousand of feet. And it was just going to keep going. There was no warning. Our airspace coordinators had no idea that was happening. So, yeah.
And was that intentional? Meaning, was that Reaper piloted and in control of somebody, or was that its mechanism when it lost control or
When
contact
it
with
loses
it?
its SATCOM. Yep, when it loses
Okay.
SATCOM, it orbits and elevates. At least over that particular, it has a degree of autonomy, obviously, but I don't think it has anything looking up.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
Interesting. Well, like same week, I got a phone call from a new startup in Raleigh, North Carolina called Precision Hawk, and they were looking for someone to head up their data analytics division. Right, they were collecting some data. They had multiple different sensors on their fixed-wing platform, and they were looking for someone to make some sense out of it and build some products and support their business. So, yeah, really interesting that the thing that probably came the closest to killing me in Afghanistan became the thing
Opened a door.
Yeah, it opened a door. Yeah, I was like,
Right.
wow, yeah, come here, get almost hit by drone, come work in drones.
Right. Right. So that got your foot in the door in the drone world. And was that, when you say sensing and that first stop, was that focused on security? Was that mapping, or what kind of?
I would say mainly mapping, and
Okay.
if I'm being very specific, it was mainly agriculture. Like those
Okay.
were the biggest investors at the time, so we were
Yep.
focused primarily there.
Right. Well, and that, for us, when we talk about drones and security and taking that leap forward of how do we use it, we need two things. We need a dock that can self-charge and deploy the drone, or else it defeats the autonomy of it if you need the human intervention in it. And then beyond visual line of sight. Right now, the current regulations from the FAA state if you're going to operate a drone, you have to maintain visual line of sight for that, which presents a challenge for a lot of use cases. And I think we're kind of right in an interesting time to see those things change or adopt. I mean, for Amazon to deliver packages, for, in our case, drone as first responder, drone for security applications. We've seen the docks coming, and those are here and available, and we're starting to see, BV loss waivers used to take, several months, and now, I've heard the last couple months they've been within 90 days or so, seems to be the current timeline. How have you seen that change over the years, BV loss wise, in drones?
Man, you hit the nail on the head. It's an arduous process, to say the least. I remember when we started with, but even before Part 107, right? There was no way that the FAA was going to allow anyone to operate a drone beyond the visual line of sight without
Right.
some very hefty safety, right? It's all about safety. All of it's about safety. The FAA,
Right.
yes, they're interested in innovation, but they're way more interested in keeping their airspace safe.
Right.
So that's what they focused on. They're like, how safe can you make this? Do you have flight termination systems? How do you detect and avoid? How do you do training? How do you account for weather? How do you account for terrain? How do you account for all of these things that you're not going to be able to physically see or sense because it's going to go beyond your visual line of sight? How are you going to account for all of it? You can't miss anything. You have to account for everything. So more and more companies, we'll call drone support, BV loss drone support companies, started to develop new technology that allowed the industry to answer some of those questions, right? The applications never got any shorter, right? To be able
Right.
to apply for a BV loss waiver, they never got any shorter, but they became more templatized.
Yes.
That became very interesting because they were tied to an operator and they were tied to a safety case, or usually around a platform, usually around a use case, usually tied to a very tight geographic area with very little population density. The use case was, there was nothing you were possibly going to hit even if you did something wrong. So
Right.
that's where the industry started to evolve, right? They're like, okay, so now you're starting to demonstrate these safety cases with operators that we now have seen multiple times, with platforms we've seen multiple times, with technology that we've now seen demonstrated multiple times.
Right.
Okay, so now that we have that, what do we do next? And that's really where the FAA, when they came out with the BV loss ARC, the Aviation Rulemaking Committee report, that's definitely something that has addressed, now hasn't solved, but has addressed what that could possibly look like going forward. So
Right.
that evolution has went from an extremely arduous process that it was almost like trying to get a patent, if I'm being
Yes.
very honest.
Yep.
It was
The
almost the
application,
same,
the whole, yeah.
all
Yep.
of it. Like, you'd have to have attorneys, you'd have to have outside experts, you'd have to have everyone come together, which was good. Like, that collaboration was very helpful, very expensive, very time consuming, but very helpful to gain the FAA's trust. And obviously we can expand this beyond the FAA, but worldwide, to gain the trust of the aviation, community, such that we're taking this seriously. These are aviation professionals. This is an aviation product. This is something that we need to be able to integrate into our national airspace safely and hopefully at scale.
I couldn't agree more. And where you can be somewhat frustrating to go through that slow process with the FAA, I think it's crucial we set the table right, because you get one crack at this, in the sense that if it rolls out and it's a disaster, it's major steps backwards. But getting it right, and there's a lot of application. Drone as a first responder, they're all trying to navigate through. Okay, the public is worried that we've got drones flying over, and are they looking at my backyard? So we've seen a lot of agencies adopt policies that they're not turning their camera on until they're on scene, or they're going to leave the camera at high horizon level or above as it's traveling to and from, to avoid privacy concerns. But there's a myriad of things to worry about, and the loudest voices seem to be the Amazons, the delivery, the big companies that are wanting to use this. And from the FAA's perspective, when we have a bunch of drones flying around and we're doing deliveries and everything else, we've got to make sure that that's managed correctly and that airspace and everything's done safely. There's so many contingencies to think of, that it's a beefy problem, but a problem that nonetheless needs to be solved.
100% agree. But with every problem becomes an opportunity, right? So there's opportunities to solve those problems, and those opportunities are creating new niches within the aviation community, within the drone industry. So that's creating new voices, new perspectives, new solutions to problems that are popping up as they go. Like, we're kind of playing BV Loss whack-a-mole, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, when we talk about specific applications, I think the FAA tends to be very favorable towards the security application, because they're sometimes shielded. They may be in areas where nobody's supposed to be. They're fenced off. We're not flying over, populated areas. We're kind of condensed to the application that we're looking at. And I'd like to talk a little bit. You mentioned the ARC, and right now the FAA has Part 107, which governs commercial drone flight. And, under those regulations currently, you have to have a visual line of sight to operate the drone. In the ARC recommendation, I know there was talk of Part 108, which is then going to be remote drone operations, and that's where us at Titan are stamping our flag. We have a remote operating center that we want to remotely operate these drones and do that on behalf of customers that don't want to have the liability or the headaches of staffing these types of facilities. But was interested to hear your thoughts or predictions on Part 108 from a timeline perspective. What do you think that will look like as they roll it out? I know part of the FAA reauthorization bill had tucked in it that they needed to come out with a proposed rule within 4 months, I believe, and a final rule within the next 16 to 24 months, if I have that right. But so things are moving forward. We're just kind of curious as to what you see on your side and what your predictions and thoughts of how that might roll out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Obviously, everything within this domain is going to be slow and intentional. Even if they have something, they have some proposed rulemaking around the new. I mean, obviously there is proposed rulemaking around the new Part 108. Extended visual line of sight operations, shielded UAS operations, and the new sort of how they're going to test for it. And it's all going to be based on, well, several things. It's going to be based on the level of autonomy, right? The autonomy level of the system. Is it going from full manual, human in the loop, or fully autonomous, no human in the loop required, overextended, over wide extended ranges, and then the complexity of the terrain of the population that it's operating in, or its operating environment, increases. So it's going to be a rapid scale, and they're going to start at the bottom. Like they're going to start there. Those are the ones they're going to start to see the most traction the fastest, simply because, like security makes sense. Agriculture makes sense. All of these different, even delivery out in rural, almost everything rural will make the most amount of sense. Disaster response, that'll come. Like all of these that make mining, like where there's really not a whole lot that the drone could possibly do, even if it's operating miles and miles, hundreds of kilometers away. As long as it's not overflying anything, it's not going to really do anything. Yet, all the requirements, even though if it was operating, are still going to be required, but the risk is much, much lower. The uncertainty is much, much lower. It's all going to be tied to risk and uncertainty based on the level of autonomy of the system. Now, obviously, we've already seen that those first levels of autonomy are kind of there. Like people are doing extended visual line of sight and shielded UAS operations today. They're doing them today, and those are becoming more commonplace. And they're even becoming more geographically, at least with the FAA, starting to become more geographically unrestricted. Now, obviously not fully. No one's going to do a fully autonomous, drone mission downtown Denver, Dallas, wherever, right, a highly populated area. Not anytime soon, but there's going to be a slow rollout. And that slow rollout will likely, kind of like if you roll in remote ID and some of the other things that they've rolled out, it's going to take years, like 2, 3 to 5 to 10 years to fully bake. Like we're gonna put everything in the oven. We're gonna hit low and slow, like they're making good barbecue, and like it's gonna bake for years. Like it's just gonna bake for years, and they're gonna get more use cases. They're gonna get more user stories. They're gonna get more safety cases. They'll gather more data. That's the biggest piece of this. They just need more data.
Right.
But they're not going to stop anything. The thing that was interesting, and I've done some interviews with FAA executives, because I'm also part of the FAA safety team as a drone pro in the Colorado-Wyoming region, and we have conversations with the FAA at a high level in DC occasionally, and when we talk about drones, because we're very curious, right? And a lot of those conversations are like, look, we're not trying to hold anybody back. Like, we're just trying to make sure that everyone does this safely, with intent, and it's fit for purpose. Like that, we're trying to make sure that we're not stovepiping. We're trying to make sure everyone has equal access, but everything's safe, right? So how do we keep this shielded? How do we keep this entire ecosystem as it's being built? Because literally they're building this aircraft as they're flying it. So it's one of those things that, they may put the wrong piece in. Okay, well, what do you have as backup? And what's the backup to the backup? Like, do you have redundancies in all of these areas? That's really where the conversation today is, because all of these new pieces and parts that are largely, if I'm being real honest, are largely coming from the aviation community themselves, which is a good thing.
So. Yep. I agree. They have a great record, and
They do. Yeah, they already have the track record. They already have the subject matter expertise. They're just either miniaturizing it or they're making it hyper-focused, and that's really where the industry is going to see the most amount of gains. Everyone's talking about the drone industry as like it's exploding and it's going exponential, and we even have a conference called Exponential. I mean, like
that's right. That's
real. Like that's real. The industry is, within specific use cases, is doing very well, and will continue. Like, it's really funny because I explained this to a colleague the other day, and knowing that I was coming onto this podcast, I was like, look, there are so many industries that are waiting.
Yes.
They're preparing, they're lying in wait, and as soon as these things become accessible, they're going to pounce. Like, this is going to happen. That's going to be the explosion, right? I still know places in every single industry you could possibly mention that touches drones at all. There are large players waiting.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, and for us, I mean, we've been trying to time it, when all these things come together. And to your point earlier, BV loss is happening, and there are applications where folks are getting those waivers and using them, and it's finding the right use case. You mentioned getting it right, and I totally agree. One thing I don't know a bunch about is regulations in other countries, and how does the U.S. fare in other countries, and are there others that are farther ahead that have either made mistakes or that we're able to learn from that have moved a little faster than we are? Any insight or anything that sticks out as far as other countries that are doing BV loss?
Absolutely, and we are a little behind, if I'm being real. Even compared to some of our neighboring countries, like Canada, we're a little behind. And then if you look at countries like, I mean, the UK is starting to get it right. Australia has been far ahead for a little while, if I'm being real honest,
Right.
because they've now sort of created tranches or tiers related to not just how the operator itself is trained and certified. So they've already taken those leaps that we're just thinking about at this point. They're
Right.
in place in the UK and in Australia, like in those particular regions. There's other areas where, like, I have operators that have talked to me in South American countries, Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, others in India, Sri Lanka, where the regulations sometimes are tied more closely to military applications, so they sort of even the commercial applications fit as a subset of military
Interesting.
applications. But
Okay.
that gives them a wider berth, right? They're
Right.
able to do and prove and gather the data much more aggressively, and much.
And is that
less
translating in a positive or a bad way? I mean, I know the FAA's main concern is what happens if a drone, goes wild and flies into a crowd, or you lose control of it. Are we seeing that in some of these countries that have opened these regulations up?
So we're not, because they are still maintaining that safety case, right? They still have to have that safety case. They're still doing what we're planning on doing. They're still going up the steps. They're not going full bore and saying, you know what, I'm going to fly a BV Lost drone downtown Rio. Like,
Right.
it's not happening. Like,
Right.
that's going to be a while. But there's a lot of territory out there that's unpopulated, especially in these countries. We look at Australia. You look at, I mean, you start to go away from the coast, there's nobody.
Right.
So utility companies, like, they're all utilizing these stepping stones that are already in place in these countries, just like they'll be in place in our country, and they're doing it safely. They're maintaining the safety case. They're gathering the data. We're collaborating with those organizations from a data gathering perspective, right? So we're understanding, because the companies, here's the interesting piece, the companies that are providing the solutions, they're not necessarily just focused on the US, they're worldwide. So
Right.
they have to adapt and have those bottom line supportive technologies that are universal to the safety case for BV loss operations of small, medium, and large sized level 1 to level 4 autonomy. So, like, they're already focusing on that in other countries where they have the license to operate. The US is just kind of, I mean, we're not just sitting back and sitting on our hands. We're listening. Like, the FAA
I
is
was going to
listening.
ask, are we at least taking advantage of that and taking notes?
Yes, I
From
can
an FAA
absolutely say
perspective.
that. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely taking notes.
Nice. And speaking of other countries, manufacture-wise, and I bring this up because, in the security space, and recently the FBI and CISA came out with the ban on Chinese-owned drones, critical infrastructure-wise. And I've seen that kind of have a ripple effect through our industry where, most of law enforcement agencies, most of the drones that are out there are DJI. They're kind of the Apple of the drone. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that. Is that a perceived threat? Is that an actual threat? Do you have many thoughts on that? Or it's particularly, and it comes in the security industry on the heels of the NDAA compliance, and because there was a whole bunch of talk about surveillance cameras that were Chinese owned, and is there a backdoor into some of these things? So I'm just kind of curious of your thoughts on that as that recently came out.
Yeah, and everyone's. I'm not going to try to get into 21st century McCarthyism, but, like, it's like there's definitely some things that are causing people to pause. Now, is the threat real? Now that's an interesting one, and I'm not going to answer that. Like, I don't think I'm not qualified to answer it. Like, I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I'm not a security expert. I'm not even an IT expert. Nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I can't even claim to be that. It's just one of those things that the industry is going to be sort of stretching itself. What's very interesting is a lot of these sort of BV loss, especially international, they're not necessarily tied. They're not disproportionately tied to Chinese systems, right? A lot of these are national systems that have been developed locally. They have their own version of cybersecurity compliance that is more open, that has more certificates, and like, because that just made it easy, right? That just made it really easy. They can control the whole process. Third party, when it comes to that, becomes a little more difficult. So and that's worldwide. That's not just here in the United States. So we're starting to see that here in the U.S. more, is that more and more systems are becoming custom designed. So I think there's an opportunity and a challenge for U.S. manufacturers to develop custom designed BVLOS specific platforms that are fully inclusive in an ecosystem. Do I think DJI has a seat at that table? I do. I don't see how they don't. Like, I think they have to be there. And because there's a lot of operators that are on the edges of these cases that are not going to give it up. They're not going to give up. They're not going to give up the what 70-80% market share that DJI has. That they can't. It would sink so many organizations, and not necessarily just for many of the reasons that you think. Like, there's a change sort of debt and inertia that's there in any organization when you say, you know what, you can't use that anymore. You got to use this. And they're like, yeah, well. No, we're not going to. I mean, you can order them, but like, that's going to cause more stress, more strain, more like. So, I think if we box them out, we're doing ourselves a disservice. Like, you're like, hey, you know what? Yeah, LeBron, you just sit. Like, we're not going to play you at all. Like, but you're going to be there.
And
we
that's
appreciate
a good analogy
today.
because they've been around, and I mean, they have a really good. You know, a lot of the law enforcement officers I talk about, DJI. Coming from a photography background has done really good with signal transmission, and they like to be able to get eyes in their command bus or what, and they do really well at those sorts of things, and they have a good product. So it'll be interesting to see how that transpires in the security world, and how that and honestly how DJI navigates through that, because I agree that if they've got a seat at the table, they've got to find some way that people are feeling comfortable from a security standpoint. And, so I think that's a conversation to be continued. And I would agree. I don't have the IT chops or the technical chops to say whether that's founded or unfounded. But, certainly the FBI and CISA are feeling like that's a threat. And so we'll kind of see how that unrolls. But. And speaking on BVLOS and continuing that conversation, I know you are hosting or moderating a panel session for NestGen, which I believe is this Saturday, if I'm...
That's true. Yep,
that's correct, Saturday?
Saturday the 24th, which also happens to be my son's 21st birthday.
Hey, nice. Well, happy birthday. It's a big day. Well, no, that's NestGen and Flightbase have been a group that we've followed and have talked to and had conversations with several times. Could you give us kind of a general overview of what NestGen is and a little bit more about the panel that you're moderating on Saturday?
Oh, absolutely. And it's expanded to 2 panels now. I don't know how I get volunteered for these things. And there's a little surprise that'll be at the beginning. You may see this face again.
Okay.
Or you'll hear this voice again. There we go.
Okay.
So NestGen is all about, look, smartphones did for communication what drones are now doing for all of these new industries, right? So there needs to be an ecosystem conversation around collaboration. That's what NestGen is about. It's now the 3rd NestGen. It's in its 3rd year, and it's an purely virtual online session. It's starting early in the morning for those that are in the other side of the planet in Australia, and those it's starting at about 2 a.m. U.S. time, and it's going to go until about noon, about 10 or about maybe 2 p.m. East Coast time, right? And they're sort of doing 2 keynotes, almost to everything. Throughout as those sessions become available, but it'll all be recorded, it'll all be available, and the conversation is really around every component of the ecosystem. So we're talking about case studies, active case studies, international. We're talking about regulations, international. We're talking about all the supportive technologies that we sort of alluded to on this podcast from multiple different perspectives, multiple different vendors, multiple different experts. And it's just a collaborative. I love this conference because it's just one of those things that you get to get deeper, but in a more intimate way. without going to a conference that has 24,000 people and you're just trying to get to the coffee place.
Right.
You know?
And this covers a bunch of different industry, from inspection, delivery, security. I mean, it's not focused on one specific industry, but the Nest portion is kind of what the drone in the box, the docking station, and how is that being used to further drones and to use autonomy in drones in different industries, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah. If you're interested in drone in a box solutions, if you're interested in BVLOS, and you're interested in the supporting ecosystem supporting both of those, this would be a conference you'd want to attend.
And for those that can attend it live, will those sessions be made available, recordings of, to be able to view at a separate time?
I'm pretty sure. I would register to make sure that you have access to that, but if I don't think they're just going to blast it out, but usually everyone that registered, you get access to all the sessions, and it's free.
Nice. Perfect. Well, that's rare in today's day, but well, I also wanted to mention too, and we'll throw a link to NestGen and specifically the panel you'll be moderating this weekend as well. But I also wanted to touch base a little bit on your podcast, Do You Know Drones, and also your nonprofit, Neurodiversity Works. Your podcast, Do You Know Drones, is based on what's the public perception of drones? How do we further the technology and the use case in a safe manner? I'm probably putting words in your mouth, but would love to hear a little bit about your show and kind of the mission of it.
Sure. Honestly, and this is sort of my higher level mission that the podcast also supports, as was the nonprofit, as does sort of even why I'm here. Changing public perception around the drone industry is a big deal, but it's also about making it more accessible to more people, so that more perspectives can come into the drone industry, but also making it a little entertaining and taking that really hard content and sort of distilling it into something that can be approachable, that it can be more understandable and can be maybe a little bit fun, and just having a little bit more fun with it. Look, I'm not claiming to be like the Joe Rogan of the drone industry, but like it's definitely something that I enjoy having these conversations with industry leaders, get to know what they're thinking. Where did they come from? I love their stories. Like that's the thing that I think is the most fun for me personally, is hearing their story, making it digestible to the masses, and then like just seeing where that goes. Like let that inspire someone. Let that bring someone into this industry that may not know about this industry, for one.
Right.
This industry is not largely known. They're like, I'm sorry, the what? The drone industry? What is that? So getting it out there a little bit more is really kind of the overall mission of Do You Know Drones, and I do that through a wide variety of things that I just find interesting.
Well, and it is interesting. That's what led me to connect with you, was watching the show, and I certainly enjoy it. We'll throw a link to that in as well for anybody that's listening that wants to check it out. And lastly, just wanted to touch a little bit on your nonprofit. You started a nonprofit called Neurodiversity Works, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I appreciate you letting me talk about it a little bit. It's really a passion project with my wife and I. Our son is autistic and has some special needs, and I didn't really know about neurodiversity or autism too much before meeting them about 5 years ago, but then started to really sort of feel it from a parent perspective, like really like wow, this is an amazing community. I'm sorry, they're under or unemployed by 85%? That's
wow.
It's crazy. Like why? Like it's bullshit. Like that makes no sense. So it's like, but why? So dive a little deeper, have many conversations. I find out I'm autistic, and I'm like, okay, so it's totally BS because I've had a great career. So like, this is not a barrier.
You're a rocket scientist,
right?
And honestly, I didn't bring that up. You mentioned that when we had chatted before, and I thought that was such a great thing to share because, anybody that's going through something like that or has kids going through something like that can feel daunting. But knowing that you can end up a rocket scientist on the other end, I think is a powerful motivator. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, thank you. And I do appreciate that. Look, I'm not trying to do this to elevate myself. Like I just want this community better supported, and I think it's a win-win for everyone because they think differently. That's literally what neurodiversity means. They think differently. We need people to enter this industry that think differently. That's what's going to take us to the next level and next level, next level. Okay, well, how do we do that? Well, the neurodiverse community, literally, that's what they do. but we need to reach out to them. How do we connect with them? How do we bring them in? How do we support them? So we created Neurodiversity Works, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, to do just that. Give them, person-centered training through workshops, through summer camps, but it's a workforce development nonprofit. Like, we, no joke, do job shadowing, mentorship, paid job shadowing. We have a second registered apprenticeship program for drone operators in the United States.
No kidding.
And it's all focused on the neurodiverse community. Obviously, we opened that one up because we can't, interestingly enough, we can't discriminate because it's a federal program. So we work with our employers to make sure that neurodiverse community is the ones that we're targeting. Right? That's where we're going. And we've had some great stories. We've had wonderful students. It's just been, I've had lots of like goosebump moments. It's like, that's what it's about. Like, I love that stuff. Like, it is a passion project that we will continue to do and get support for, and move into this industry, full force, at full speed, because we think the industry needs it, and we know this population needs it.
Well done, and I applaud you for doing that, and that's a great organization. We'll put some info on that as well as your podcast, and I know I'll be tuning into your panel on Saturday. I really appreciate you coming on. Did I leave anything on the table or anything that we didn't chat about that you want to cover now?
No, this has been really great, and like I said, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you bringing me on the show. I appreciate your listeners and wanting to understand how the drone industry is evolving and how the security industry is evolving with it. So I think that's really cool, and just to see it from another perspective, another use case, because I try to see it from as many use cases as possible, and so it's really fun to just hear from another expert that's been doing something deep within another industry that's now approaching the drone industry in a very active way. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that and appreciate you coming on. Hopefully, one of many appearances. I'd love to have you back, and especially as BV Loss in Part 108 unfolds. Love to continue the conversation, but can't thank you enough for coming on today.
Truly my pleasure.
You got it. Well, thanks. If anybody has any questions, thoughts, comments, anything we covered today, love to hear from you. But that's all we have today, and we will see you next time.